Hey friends, I'm Lynn Debilzen, and welcome to Redraw Your Path, a podcast where I share stories of people who have made big changes in their lives and forged their own unique paths. I talk with guests about their moments of messiness, fear, and reframing on their way to where they are now. My goal is to inspire you about the shape your life could take. So let's get inspired. Hey y'all, I'm really excited to share this next episode with you with Meredith Patrick. You're going to hear how Meredith faces every turn in her journey with bravery and an optimist's outlook, really looking for the opportunities in it. A little bit about Meredith's background. After 15 years of working as an operational and administrative specialist for top-ranked companies like Mayo Clinic, Meredith kept wondering, is this all there is? And she finally ditched the traditional track to create her dream career as a personal project manager. Now she helps 6- and 7-figure female entrepreneurs conquer their to-do list, providing efficient back-end relief by taking projects they've been putting off for months and getting them to the finish line ahead of schedule. She is passionate about helping her clients achieve their dreams through collaboration and inclusion, being the exact support they need exactly when they need it most. You're going to hear about Meredith's journey from reading Babysitter's Club books and dreaming of lots of different careers to where she is now. I really loved my conversation with her, and I hope you do too. If you have any thoughts or reactions, I love connecting with you. Please feel free to reach out on LinkedIn or by email. Hey, Meredith, it is so excellent to have you on Redraw Your Path today. How are you?
I'm great, Lynn. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. And I know you're a listener of the podcast, so you know where we start. I was wondering if you'd be able to share some context about where and how you grew up.
Yeah, great question. So I grew up in the Philly suburbs. My dad is a doctor and my mom is a nurse practitioner, and they encouraged both me and my older sister to just always follow what we were interested in and passionate about. So that led to a variety of different things. I've always been an avid reader since I was little. I don't know about you, but I loved the Babysitter's Club, and the character Stacy had diabetes, and I became interested in diabetes, and obviously coming from a healthcare family, that was natural. And so when people would ask me, what do you want to be when you grow up? For a while, I would say I want to be an endocrinologist specializing in diabetes, thanks to the Babysitter's Club. But then I also loved the ocean and whales and dolphins. The Little Mermaid was my favorite Disney movie, so I also wanted to be a marine biologist. And I also loved movies and acting in school plays, so I wanted to be an actor and win a Best Actress Oscar. So I was really fortunate to just have such a supportive family that really encouraged me to pursue all those interests.
Awesome. I love that. And it's interesting because I'm hearing so many passions and interests coming from that childhood. And I'm curious, and I know we'll get into it, but I'm curious how you went about sorting through those, because it can be really hard to decide, do you want to be an endocrinologist specializing in diabetes or an actor? That is really, really tough to figure out.
Yeah, for sure. Especially at such a young age, right? I feel like the pressure is always on teenagers, like out of high school, to choose what they want to do with the rest of their lives. So when I graduated high school at that time, that was when I was interested in acting. I'd kind of given up on the endocrinologist thing because I hate blood. So going to med school wasn't really a smart choice, I didn't think. So when I graduated high school, I was into acting. And so the first kind of pivot on my journey, since we're talking about redrawing your path, rather than go to a 4-year liberal arts college like my peers, I spent my freshman year of college at an acting conservatory in New York. So I just decided to pursue that passion out of high school because that was just the timing of it. And I went from there.
Awesome. Is an acting conservatory, is there a certain number of years that people spend there, or what does that typically look like on a typical path of becoming an actor?
I'm not sure about just conservatories in general. The one I went to was 2 years. but I only spent my freshman year there because I very quickly learned that acting was not my passion. It was just a hobby and that I didn't want to do it professionally, but I will never regret that decision. Honestly, it was one of the best decisions I ever made because being 18 years old in New York City just was life changing, right? Because you have so many opportunities to learn and grow and explore. And it shaped who I am as a person in terms of being independent and autonomous. But I like to joke that I spent half my time in classes and half my time at Yankee Stadium because I was a huge Yankees fan. But just having that opportunity to explore New York City at 18 years old is a once in a lifetime gift. So I don't regret that course at all.
Absolutely. Love that. I'm curious. So I'm guessing you're probably not still spending your time as that 18-year-old in New York City. So where and how are you
Correct.
currently spending your days?
So I'm currently spending my days as an entrepreneur. I started my own business in April of 2023. It's called Vinsco Jacobs. I named it after my grandmothers because I work with female entrepreneurs and support women-owned small businesses. So it's definitely been a twisting journey to get from New York to here, but I'm very happy with where I ended up.
Love that. And thanks for explaining too the Vinsco Jacobs. That's a really beautiful way to honor your grandmothers in doing that work.
Thank you. Yeah, they're two of the most influential people in my life. And unfortunately, they both passed away, but I hope I make them proud. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to name my business after them.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm sure you are making them proud. And I'm excited to dive into that pivot. But first, I'm curious. So, going back to that childhood of little Meredith reading Babysitter's Club. So most of us grow up with some sort of external pressure expectations. And you talked about your parents wanting you to pursue your passions and really follow them. Were there any other expectations that were placed on you, or maybe like molds or suggested life paths that you were expected to take?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was just kind of implied that both my sister and I would go to college. I never doubted that or considered otherwise, right? We were raised in an upper middle class family, and education was always super important. And obviously, having a doctor and nurse practitioner for parents, they just expected us to go to college. And so I don't regret that at all because both my year at the acting conservatory as well as when I transferred to a liberal arts school, that was a huge part of shaping who I am, as I said. But I also recognize that that's not the best fit for everyone. So I encourage young adults to make the right choice for them. But that was, I think, the only expectation was that I would get a college degree.
Awesome. And I'm so curious. So you talked about going to that acting conservatory right out of high school. Can you share more about what that was like and what your realization point of maybe this isn't the best fit was like?
Yeah, so I had a Quaker education from kindergarten through high school. I went to a Quaker school. And so it was really immersive in terms of learning, obviously, all the regular courses like English and history, but it was also a very small class size. Like when I meet people who have gone to public schools or somewhere else that they have a graduating class of several hundred people, I'm like, my class was 60 people. We
Mhm.
all knew each other. The teacher to student ratio was really great. And so just transitioning from that to an acting conservatory was really interesting because obviously you're not doing English or history anymore, right? You're exclusively doing acting. There was obviously like vocal training and movement and different aspects that are involved with acting. So that was definitely a shift. And then also just living in a metropolitan area like New York, coming from the suburbs of Philly. So again, I loved that experience, but just I quickly realized both that I wanted something more well-rounded, like my Quaker education had been, just to let me explore all the different avenues that I was interested in since I was a kid. And also just I didn't enjoy the acting classes as much as I thought
Mm.
I would, or the productions that we ended up doing at the end of the year. I just realized this is what I enjoy as a hobby when I was at school, but I didn't want it to be my full-time career.
Mm. And did you have any fears or any doubts that were coming up as you were making that decision and talking with whoever you were talking with, whether that was your parents or your family at that time, about changing paths?
I don't think there were fears. I remember being really confident that it was the right choice. Like I wasn't nervous that I would regret it because even though, like I said, I had daydreamed about winning an Oscar one day, I was like, that's clearly not going to happen. So I didn't have fears about giving that up. I think there was just the uncertainty of what's next, right? Because I did choose to transfer to a liberal arts school. And I just wasn't really sure what the rest of my path would look like at that point, because obviously I wasn't going to major in drama. I did end up doing some plays at that school. But I think there was just that uncertainty of like, what's next in my path now.
Awesome. And did you have any sort of inkling about what was next? Or as you were making that transfer, did you have a major picked out? Or were you leaving that really up to fate and what you discovered along the path?
Yeah, so I ended up choosing French, again, following my parents' advice of choosing what you're interested in, because I had taken French in middle and upper school and really enjoyed it and wanted to continue it and pursue it and become fluent in it. I was thinking possibly of being an interpreter, translator after I graduated, but obviously you certainly don't get fluent in 3 years of college. But even if I had been, unfortunately, there weren't any interpreter or translator jobs on the market at that point.
Mm.
So that led to my next pivot, which I decided to work as an administrative assistant, because back when I was a student in high school, I had worked part-time as an admin at my dad's doctor office. And I just decided to use those skills. My first few years out of college, I was an admin for some nonprofits. And then I ended up getting a job at a cancer hospital here in Philly as an administrative assistant. And that began my almost 10-year career in healthcare.
Awesome. It's interesting because it sounds like you stayed really in that healthcare space, but as an admin assistant, you're using a lot more diverse skill sets than you would in that more like clinical aspect, I imagine, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, it was a whole different ball game going from nonprofit to healthcare. Just like it's a whole different language almost, truly, with all like the acronyms and oncology. I didn't have a background in oncology at all, so that was just certainly diving into the deep end there. But yeah, like building my administrative assistant skills. I was at the cancer hospital for almost 6 years and worked my way up. I got promoted to executive assistant and learned a lot, obviously, about like communication and team building and all those great soft skills as well. And then COVID hit. And unfortunately, I was required to come in on site, and I wasn't comfortable with that because I have an immunocompromised family member. And it was at the very beginning of COVID, and I just was too worried about them and didn't want to put them at risk. And so I ended up getting a remote job for a genetic testing company.
Mm.
Again, following the through line of what I'm interested in at the cancer hospital, I had worked in the Department of Clinical Genetics, and I found it and still find it to be a fascinating, innovative field. So I ended up working at that genetic testing company for a couple years in operations. So I started in admin, got promoted to executive assistant, ended up working in operations for 2 years at the genetic testing company. They then unfortunately had layoffs, and I ended my healthcare career at Mayo Clinic, which in the healthcare industry in the United States is like Mount Everest, right? Once you get to Mayo, you've made it. So
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm curious too, one that must have been really interesting, and that's like one turn is you leaving that role, but going back to that other the I guess it was two turns there, right? Like the getting that French major and then moving into admin assistantship out of college and nonprofits to healthcare. Were there any like narratives you were rewriting for yourself in terms of, oh, I have this French major, but now I'm not using it or anything like that? Or did it feel pretty smooth to you?
I think it felt pretty smooth. Again, because I had done the part-time work in high school, I think if I didn't have that, it might have felt more choppy. But just having that kind of in my back pocket as another alternative made it smoother. And I knew that I could keep up with my French. I still do. I go on Duolingo every day just to not lose it. So I wasn't concerned too much that I wasn't able to get a full-time job using it.
Oh, awesome. Have you had the chance to do immersion at all with your French?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I transferred to the liberal arts school and majored there, my school required all foreign language majors to do an immersion study abroad program.
Mm.
So, like for Spanish majors, there was a really popular like summer intensive in Costa Rica, but I knew I wanted a more long-term situation. So I ended up doing a semester in Paris. And just like New York, that was like one of the best experiences of my life. It was incredible. And so again, like another reason I will never regret that French major because I got to spend a semester in Paris, like learning a new language and a new culture and just getting to explore that city and the surrounding country. It was amazing.
Yeah, so powerful. And from being a listener that we are pro mandatory study abroad here
Yes.
at Redraw Your Path. It can just be so informative and I think life-changing too for young people if they have not been exposed to cultures other than the one where they grew up. So, any other things before we talk about your turn of leaving that Mayo Clinic role? Anything you want to share about any of those turns and just like what was going on internally or any decisions you really struggled with during those times?
Yeah, that's actually a perfect lead in to the decision to leave Mayo because that whole time, not just in healthcare, but since I graduated college and started getting jobs, I was always wondering, is this all there is? I just
Mm,
felt like there had to be more. I was just never satisfied with what I was doing. And so I would always say, "Oh, well, when I get this promotion, I'll be satisfied," or when I start working at X company, I'll be satisfied, or when I hit six figures, I'll be satisfied. And so on paper, Mayo was my dream job, right? Because not only is it the leader in the industry, I was making six figures for the first time in my career. I had been working towards that for years. I was getting to work with amazing people in a role that I was really proud of. I had started in my career as an admin assistant and I worked my way up to program manager at Mayo. But I realized I was still internally wondering, is this all there is? And for
mm,
being at Mount Everest, I was like, if I'm still wondering if this is all there is, then maybe this is an intrinsic internal thing. And this isn't an external problem. It's not the role or the company. This is me. And so that's when I started just doing some self evaluating. And I decided to use my 15 years of experience in that point with administrative and operational support to start my own business part
mhm,
time. Because as a program manager, I was helping health tech startups with their business goals. And it was really interesting. And I thought, oh, I can help local Philly businesses with their business goals and use my skills and just see if that's a better fit than corporate. And so I started part time, but I felt like I wasn't giving it the attention that it deserved because obviously working full time, 8 hours a day doesn't leave that much time to focus on your business. And
mhm,
so I started part time in April, but then made the decision in September to take that really scary leap of quitting my full time job and going full time with my business. I didn't have the full roster of clients that I wanted, but I just knew that I wanted to pay as much attention and build it the way that I knew that it could grow. And so I left Mayo, and literally the day before my last day, Lynn, I booked a 6-month contract with a client for my business. And so I just felt like that
wow.
was the universe's sign that like I was finally on the right path.
Absolutely. I love that, and huge congrats, and definitely as a new business owner myself, I understand it is a chicken and an egg, and do you wait
Yes.
until the perfect time? And there's never a perfect time, so that's huge to take that leap. Can I ask, so you said there was a moment where you realized, oh, maybe it's internal that I'm always looking for what else there is. Maybe that's okay. I'm not a total Swiftie, but isn't that the phrase or the lyric of it? Is it me? The problem's me.
It's me. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me. Yes.
Thank you. You're a
Yeah.
better Swiftie than me. Thank you. But what was that moment like for you when you realized, oh, this is an internal thing that I'm always looking for more?
Yeah, I feel like with any new job, we kind of give ourselves like 60 to 90 days, right? On both ends, both as like the new worker, but also from the company side, just to see if it's a good fit. And so it was really at the 60-day mark, just like coincidentally, I wasn't marking the calendar, but 2 months in, when I realized like, oh, I'm not enjoying this the way I thought I would. I'm not like excited about climbing the ladder at Mayo. Like when I first started that job, I thought like, oh, my career, because that's what people do. Like once you get in the door at Mayo, like you stay there for life, understandably. And so after 2 months, when I didn't have that level of excitement that I thought I would, that's when it was like, oh, maybe, maybe it's not the job. If this is a pattern, then maybe it's me and not the external forces.
That's a really incredible self-awareness to be able to step back and make that realization of what's the common denominator. And I think it's interesting, I think generationally, right? Like there are certain generations that have had 30, 40, 50-year careers at one place. And you mentioned, yeah, usually like Mayo Clinic is that type of place where people get there and they stay for a long time. But I think that that's also what we see generationally. And sometimes we're getting those messages, right, from generations before us.
Yeah, for sure. Going back to like you said about expectations, for sure. Like my parents and my grandparents' generation, yeah, that was the status quo, was to just get a job and stay there for most of your career and then retire. But for us millennials and Gen Zers, like that hasn't been the case. I forget what the statistic I read recently was, but that like we're expected to change our jobs like
Mhm.
almost 7 times at least. So yeah, I think that's definitely a generational thing.
Yeah, and I think it's all right, listeners, don't come at us if we're getting this stat wrong. But I think it's not just our job 7 times. I think it's our actual like career and function,
Mm,
what we're
yeah.
doing. And yeah, I think I've hit 7 and I just turned 40. So right on track. I love that. Did you feel any sort of guilt or stress realizing, wait, like I've made it to this dream job and now this isn't it? Or did it again feel like pretty smooth making that realization?
Another great question. I think partially because I started with my business part-time, I was like, "Oh, I'll just like test the waters and see like if this alternative is actually what I'm looking for." I think that really helped smooth the way that I was kind of doing like A/B testing of does this work or does this work?
Mm.
And so that really helped the transition as opposed to just like giving up after those first 60 days and either like slugging it out and being somewhere that wasn't the right fit for me or doing the opposite and like jumping ship after 60 days and going in full time into my business when I wasn't ready for that at all. So I think the 6 months in between starting my business part time and then jumping into it full time kind of helped make that transition as smooth as it possibly could be.
Yeah, and it sounds like you are building really a space of security for yourself too, in knowing that, okay, this position doesn't feel right. However, I have this other thing over here that I'm building and that I'm really proud of and excited about. And that is feeling much more right.
Oh, for sure, and I had enough in savings to make me comfortable, like, my parents had raised me to have savings throughout my life, so I think if it had been more difficult financially on me to jump ship, that would have been much more stressful than it already was, but thankfully, I had savings built up, so really it was just that mental decision of, "Is this the right fit for me going forward?" And once I made that leap, I was 100% all in.
Love that. Do you remember as a kiddo or a high schooler thinking maybe someday I'll be an entrepreneur?
No, it's funny. My sister was always the entrepreneur of the family. Like we always tease her to this day still that she was selling like highlight magazines on our front lawn and doing the lemonade stands. Like if either of us were going to start our own business, it was going to be her. Yeah, I never ever imagined it. And I think looking back, everything that I went through led to me being an entrepreneur. Like all the experiences living in different cities like New York and Paris and following my curiosity and building my skill set and learning a new industry like healthcare and oncology and genetic testing. I think all of those different parts kind of gave me the mindset of an entrepreneur that finally, when the time was right, I was like, oh, this feels like a natural fit.
Mm-hmm.
But nowhere previously did I actually consider it, if that makes sense.
It absolutely makes sense. And it's interesting. I talk to so many, specifically women entrepreneurs, and I think that is a pretty common story where we never thought it would be us, but looking back, it all makes sense. And I think that that's really powerful too, because you've been building these skill sets your entire life, not with the goal to dominate the world and be the next Amazon, but
Right.
really those skill sets were you were growing them because you were enjoying it at the time and that those can now serve you. I'm curious, when you look at your current path and what you see for your current path, what are you seeing when you look into the future for this path?
Yeah, one of my favorite parts of having started my own business is that I've already pivoted so many times within my own business, right? Like
Mm.
it had started as one thing and I'm almost at the year mark and I've pivoted several times. I've changed my client type several times. I've raised my prices. And I was talking about it with a friend, and she had also come from a corporate background. And we talk about the employee versus CEO mindset, that as an employee, you're like, oh, well, I only get a raise once a year, right? When there's annual raises, or I only get a promotion after being in my job for such amount of time. And one of the most exciting things for me as an entrepreneur is just having that power and opportunity to just say at any point, oh, well, I'm going to give myself a raise now, or oh, like
Mhm.
this isn't working out, so I'm going to try this now instead, as opposed to waiting for some arbitrary deadline. Just being able to be flexible and pivot based again on what I'm interested in or curious about. I think that's been one of the most rewarding aspects of being an entrepreneur by far.
Yeah, I want to second that. It's definitely been, for me, a little unsettling and confusing, to be
For
honest.
sure.
But also,
Yeah.
I think that ability to be able to pivot. And I remember one of the conversations I had well before I came up with the idea for Redraw Your Path was with someone who will be a future guest. We have an interview scheduled, but she said, if you do something and a month later you are not liking it anymore, you get to choose. You get to change it. And I'm like,
Exactly. Yeah.
"What?" Like, my brain could not conceive of that. And the fact that I'm this far into my adulthood and someone was giving me that wisdom, I was very grateful for it.
Yeah.
And I just have to laugh because I think it's really common sense, but also you're right, when you are in the corporate space or whatever spaces you might be in, that might not be the norm to develop that
Right.
CEO mindset.
Everything is a learning experience, as I like to say, right? That nothing is wasted. If you learn something from what you're doing and it ends up not being a right fit, then at least you learned, okay, that wasn't a right fit. Let's try something else. And that's how we just constantly evolve and change as humans, right? Is that we learn and grow.
Yeah, 100%. Meredith, any other turns or ways that you redrew your path that we didn't cover or that we went too quickly through?
No, I think we covered all of them. And there's definitely starting as an actor in New York and then ending up as an entrepreneur was not the journey I thought I would be on. But like I said, it was all a learning experience and everything worked out. So I'm really happy with where I ended up.
Yeah. Do you still do any acting? Like, do you do any community acting or anything like that?
I don't. I've always enjoyed doing accents. So one of my things with my sister and I is that, especially British accents, we've always loved because we just grew up watching like period dramas. So like we'll occasionally just talk to each other in silly British accents, and that's kind of like the extent of me still being
Mhm.
an actor.
Absolutely love that. I think it's one of the best conflict resolution techniques, honestly, is if everybody just used a different voice, we would all be having a little bit more fun. And yeah, the conflict would be a little less serious. So, is there any advice you would give to others who are considering redrawing their paths?
Yeah, I love that question. And it ties into what I was just talking about, how on paper, my journey might not make sense, right? Like I started with acting in New York and then switched to a French major and then pivoted to healthcare. And I'm now an entrepreneur. Like on paper, that doesn't make sense. But going back to that, I learned something from all of those things, like living in New York and Paris changed me fundamentally as a human being and nurtured my curiosity and independence, which, like I said, has been very helpful as an entrepreneur. And then the skill sets, as we also discussed, that I learned throughout my decade in healthcare in terms of technical skills, but also soft skills, just engaging with people and customers and CEOs and just learning about all those different facets of running a business that even on paper, if it doesn't make sense, your journey, you will end up where you are meant to be. So I just encourage everyone to just not put so much pressure on themselves to have it all figured out. I feel as adults, that's something that we weren't told as kids, is that none of us have it figured out. There isn't some secret magical answer that adults know to live their lives successfully. I think we're all just doing the best we can. And so just follow your curiosity and your passion, and you'll end up where you're meant to be.
That is fantastic advice. And selfishly, why I started this podcast, because I need to hear that advice every day. But really taking that pressure off of yourself and realizing that every single one of us is just figuring it out is, I mean, really life changing advice. So I appreciate you sharing that. And then the other piece of you're going to learn something from every step in your journey or every different section of the path. And so realizing that and really seeing it as an opportunity that will eventually get you to where you're meant to be is really beautiful advice. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's why I was so excited to come on to your podcast. I love that you've created it because I think we all think that we're different, right? Because certainly our paths are all different, but at our core, like we're all on the same journey of life, not to get like cliche or sappy, but just like we're all learning as we go. And so that's just why I love this podcast and the opportunity to share our stories, because we're learning that we are more similar than we think, that even if we're pivoting constantly and it feels like we're meant to be exactly, that everyone else is pivoting and redrawing their own paths as well. And I think that's really powerful.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And yeah, I've learned just so much about those commonalities between all of us and just what we can learn from everybody's different stories. And so that's what I hope listeners take away as well. So Meredith, where can people find you? And is there anything you would want to promote or share with listeners?
Yeah, thank you. So my main social media is on LinkedIn. So feel free to follow me on LinkedIn, is where I post and connect with people. I have my website, which is vinscojacobs.com, where you can learn more about me and my offers. And my main offer is a one and done VIP day that I take a project that female leaders and entrepreneurs have been putting off for months, and I help them get it done in a day. And I love doing that. So if anyone has a project that they need help with, feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Meredith. I appreciate that. And I'll include your links and information in the show notes. And I can't wait to share your story with listeners.
Well, thank you so much, Lynn. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Thanks for listening to Redraw Your Path with me, Lynn Debilzen. If you liked the episode, please rate and review. That helps more listeners find me. And don't be shy. Reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn and sign up for my e-newsletter at redrawyourpath.com. I can't wait to share more inspiring stories with you. See you next week.